Good morning, friends. This is Bhautik from the Department of English and Communication Skills, Bharati University for Rural Innovation. Welcome to the second Speakora Club session, wherein we are looking at the Jacobean and Caroline age. Friends, imagine a literature which is written and filled with ambition, love, fear, violence, political conflict, and religious tension. Imagine an England where the king believed that his authority directly came from the God. So he is as powerful as the God. And it is a severe crime to offend or not to believe in any religious practices or any religious belief of that time. This is the world of the Jacobean and Caroline age. If you look at the timeline of these ages, then James I, when he came to the rule in 1603 to 1625, it is Jacobean age, and Charles I from 1625 to 1649, it is called Caroline age. Together they represent a fascinating and often dark chapters in English literary history. In order to understand socio-political and religious conflicts and context of this time, we must look at two major events. Number one is gunpowder plot of 1604, and number two is English Civil War in 1642. One happened during the reign of James I, while the other happened during the reign of Charles I. When James I came in power in 1603, immediately after Elizabeth I, his reign brought religious and political tension to the surface. One famous event was the gunpowder plot of 1605, when a group of Catholics attempted to blow up Parliament. But religious conflict was only a part of the story. There was also growing disagreement between the monarchy and the Parliament. So there was a group of people that believed in monarchy, and the other group of the people believed in Parliament democracy. When Charles I became a king in 1625, the belief that the king received his authority from God was questioned. His conflict with Parliament eventually contributed to the English Civil War in 1642. So these were the times of political uncertainty, religious conflict, social change, and anxiety. And all of these found their way into literature. So what makes Jacobean and Caroline literature different from other literature? The first one is a dark mood. Compared with much of Elizabethan literature, Jacobean writing often feels more pessimistic and disturbing. Writers explored death, violence, revenge, corruption, betrayal, and madness. The second feature or a major characteristic of this age is religion and spirituality. Questions both seem that salvation, faith, and God. And these issues become very important. The third was intellectual complexity. Poets loved wheat paradox, argument, and unusual comparison. They wanted readers not only to feel but also to think. The fourth was psychological depth. Characters became increasingly complex. They struggled with ambition, jealousy, guilt, desire, and moral choices. And finally, social criticism. Writers used satire to express greed, hypocrisy, corruption, and foolishness. In one sentence, we can say Jacobean and Caroline literature looks deep into the human mind and into a society struggling with uncertainty and change. So this was the world of Jacobean and Caroline ages. Now let us meet some of the authors of these ages. The first one, of course, William Shakespeare. Although Shakespeare began his writing during the Elizabethan period, several of his greatest works belong to the Jacobean age. These include Macbeth, King Lear, Othello, and The Tempest. Then we have Ben Jonson, famous for his satirical comedy Walpole, which attacks greed and corruption. Another important dramatist was John Webster, whose tragedy, The Duchess of Malfi, is unknown for its dark atmosphere, violence, revenge, and psychological complexity. If you read The Duchess of Malfi, you will realize what sort of political uncertainty, religious tension, love, ambition were so prevalent during those times. One of the most important poets of the period was John Donne, the leading figure associated with metaphysical poetry. His poems combine love, religion, wit, paradox, and intellectual argument. Important examples include The Flea and A Valediction forbidding mourning. Other metaphysical poets include George Herbert, Andrew Marvell, and so on and so forth. We also have Cavalier poets such as Robert Herrick, Richard Lovelace, and Sir John Suckling. Their poetry often celebrates love, beauty, pleasure, honor, and loyalty. What were the literary movements and ideas that dominated these times? 3 important literary transitions help us understand this period. Number 1 is metaphysical poetry. Now, metaphysical poets used wit, paradox, intellectual arguments, and conceits, surprising compositions between very different things. John Donne is the best example. In one famous poem, Donne compares two lovers to the two legs of compass. Strange comparison, but yes, this is exactly what makes metaphysical poetry interesting. Second one is Cavalier poetry. Cavalier poets were generally associated with the royalist side during the political conflicts of the period. So, their poetry often celebrates love, beauty, friendship, loyalty, and enjoyment of life. And the third one is Jacobean tragedy, which is very important and interesting too. Jacobean drama became famous for its darkness, revenge, murder, madness, ambition, and corruption. It often asked a powerful question, and the question is, what happens when human desire becomes into the question is, what happens when human desire come into conflict with morality? So this was the very powerful question. You will see some of the answer in the Duchess of Malfi. Three very interesting facts of these times. Number one is Shakespeare's Macbeth. It is Jacobean tragedy and strongly concerned with ambition, kinship, murder, and supernatural elements. Second one is, you may know these words, no man is an island. They were written by John Donne. It is not a line from his poem, but it is from his prose work called Devotions upon Emergent Occasions. And the third one is, literature during this period was not simply entertainment. Plays and poems could reflect contemporary concerns about power, religion, politics, gender, morality, and social corruption. So, the Jacobean and Caroline ages gave literature, specifically English literature, some of its greatest dramas and most powerful poetry, and upon that, the most complex characters. But their importance goes beyond history. Their writers ask questions that are still relevant today. These three questions that Jacobean and Caroline dramatists ask. What happens when ambition becomes dangerous? Number two, how should power be used? And number three, what is the meaning of love, faith, and morality? From Shakespeare to Donne, these writers remind us that literature is a mirror of its society, but it can also change that society. Very important message. And that is what makes the Jacobean and Caroline ages not just important periods of the past, but living parts of English literary history today. Thank you.